All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual lunch bunch. My name is Sarah Chandler. I am a community partnership manager with Delaware Hospice. Today, Dr. Judy is going to be talking about Hello from Heaven. If anyone did not receive the handout, please put your email in the chat and I will send it over to you. We are also going to be playing some clips today, so if you have any trouble hearing them, please let me know. You can unmute yourself and tell me or put it in the chat. Dr. Judy, I will turn it over to you.
All right, welcome everybody. So good to see so many people here today. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about next month, and then we'll get right into this. Next month, I'm going to talk about caring for somebody who has dementia. I do run a support group for people who are caregivers of people with dementia, primarily frontotemporal degeneration, but we allow anybody who's dealing with somebody who has dementia in the group. So I know really up close and personal just how taxing being a caregiver for someone with dementia can be. It can weaken people's immune systems for up to 3 years after they're done taking care of the person with dementia. Caregivers are twice as likely as other caregivers to report substantial emotional, physical, and financial difficulties. Caring for someone with dementia presents very unique and very challenging demands. Which is why it's essential that caregivers practice good self-care, which is very challenging. Talk about their feelings, recognize the grief. There's a lot of grief involved in caring for somebody who's disappearing a little bit every day. So come and learn about some of those challenges, but more importantly, come and talk with me and listen to other people's ideas as well about how to get the kind of resources you need, how to develop sources of support, because nobody should try to do this alone. And some of the ideas of other people that other people have already developed for how to deal with problematic behavior and things like that, and how to make time for your own care, which is very challenging when you're caring for somebody with dementia. Now,
this is next month, Dr. Judy?
This is next month. It's on Monday, October 7th from 12:30 to 1:30. Yeah, please pass it on to anybody who knows in that position. And I know often people are in that position, don't have a lot of free time, but we'll record it as we always do. So I got interested in this topic, because I heard from people who had near-death experiences. I haven't had a near-death experience, but I've had a few experiences of feeling like the presence of a loved one who's passed away. And so I got interested in this. Now, as a psychologist, can I tell you whether these things are real or not real? I'm not a theologian, I'm a psychologist. So today I'm only going to tell you about what people report who have near-death experiences and the consistency of those reports across cultures, across age groups, provides some pretty compelling evidence that this is really what happens to people when they have a near-death experience. But again, I'm not trying to make a theological argument here. I'm really just a psychologist. So I'm just going to tell you what the literature says about people who have near-death experiences and what the literature also says about after-death communication, which a lot of people also experience. So how common are near-death experiences? In the United States, it's estimated that 9 million people have reported a near-death experience. That's a pretty high number of people. And I'm quoting now, near-death experiences are reported by about 17% of those who nearly die. NDEs, which they're called near-death experiences, have been reported by children, adults, scientists, physicians, priests, ministers, among the religious and the atheist, and from countries throughout the world. So that's a quote. This is a widespread phenomenon that cuts across all age groups and cultures. And part of the reason we're experiencing more of this or learning more about this, and I'm quoting now again, advances in medical resuscitation have helped fuel the NDE studies, since researchers can now analyze data from large cohorts of cardiac arrest patients or survivors. For example, in a 2001 study of 344 patients who were successfully resuscitated in Dutch hospitals, 18% reported a near-death experience. So the fact that people can live longer and we're able to resuscitate better is part of the reason we're hearing more and more of these experiences. So let me tell you what people generally report as sort of the typical near-death experience. There's a sensation of leaving the body, often hovering above the body and observing what's going on underneath. I have a client who was killed in a car accident but was later revived, who saw herself being covered up by the EMTs with a sheet. She was hovering above her body. And some validation for this claim that people are outside of their bodies and observing things was found in a number of studies that have had people who had near-death experiences describe what happened during their resuscitation. And then they compared it to people who didn't have a near-death experience, who didn't remember leaving their bodies and observing it, their descriptions of what happened during the resuscitation, to see if, in fact, the people who had left their bodies and were observing picked up on more detail than the people who did not report having a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience. There's been 2 separate studies I'll mention, but there's been others as well that really show that people who have had a near-death experience are much more able to accurately describe the resuscitation efforts, while those who didn't leave their body and observe it can't as well. And now I'm quoting, but both groups of patients, and they're talking about both those who had near-death experiences and those who didn't, both groups of people were asked to describe their own resuscitation as best they could. Saban, that's one of the studies, found that the group of near-death experienced patients were much more accurate than the control group in describing their own resuscitations. A second study by Satori also found that near-death experiencers were often remarkably accurate in describing details of their resuscitation. The control group that did not have a near-death experience was highly inaccurate and often could only guess at what occurred during their resuscitation. Certainly lends some validity to the idea that the people who said they had an out-of-body experience where they were being revived and they were watching it, they often can even tell you the emotions of some of the people in the room and what they were feeling. They're also, the person that's out of their body is also generally very calm and doesn't understand why everybody's freaking out. But the interesting confirmation that they're experiencing something real and observing something that is not noticed just by being in that situation in a semi-conscious or unconscious state is the fact that those who had left their body and observed it had much more detail, much more accurate in reporting what was done to them to resuscitate them. In fact, accuracy rates in describing resuscitation range from anywhere from 89% to 97% accuracy when compared to people who did not have an out-of-body experience. Sometimes people describe things that are going on outside of the operating room or the room in which they died. And for many people who believe in near-death experiences, they feel like this is the one phenomenon that really calls into question any kind of biological or physiological explanation for what's happening in the brain that occurs when people are dying and would explain a near-death experience. They observe things that are happening outside of the room they're in. I'm reading now a story. I was in the hospital having an operation for periodontitis. I developed pneumonia and was very ill. The ward was L-shaped so that anyone in bed in one part of the ward could not see around the corner. One morning I felt myself floating upwards and found I was looking down on the rest of the patients. I could see myself propped up against pillows, very white and ill. I saw the sister and nurse rush into my bed with oxygen. Then everything went blank. The next thing I remember was opening my eyes to see the sister bending over me. I told her what had happened, but at first she thought I was rambling. Then I said, there is a big woman sitting up in the bed with her head wrapped in bandages, and she is knitting something with blue wool, and she has a very red face. This certainly shook her, as apparently the lady concerned had a mastoid operation and was just as I had described. She was not allowed out of the bed, and of course I hadn't been up at all. And after several other details, such as the time on the clock on the wall, which had been broken, I convinced her that at least something strange had happened to me. So this is somebody who observed a patient in another room, described it to the people who resuscitated her, and they confirmed what she had said. Now, one of the most famous out-of-body experiences was reported by a social worker named Kimberly Clark, and her book, and I think her full name now is Kimberly Clark Sharp, so she must have got married. Her book is in the reading list. She was a social worker at Harbor View Hospital in Seattle in 1984, and it involved a young woman named Maria and her critical care nurse, social worker, Kimberly Clark. Maria was a migrant worker who, while visiting friends in Seattle, had a severe heart attack. She was rushed to Harbor View Hospital and placed in the coronary care unit. A few days later, while still in the CCU unit, she had a cardiac arrest and underwent a classic out-of-body experience. After her resuscitation, she reported having risen out of her body and floating up above the hospital. When she recounted her experience, the hospital staff was extremely skeptical. Maria, however, was adamant. She described seeing a blue tennis shoe on the ledge of a top-floor window. Kimberly Clark, the critical care social worker, went up to the window, went actually around the hospital looking at all the windows, from what I understand, until she in fact found that blue sneaker, which was right on a shelf outside the window of one of those hospital windows. And she had described that one of the strings was tucked under the shoe. That's exactly how they found it. So that's one of the most compelling stories I've ever heard about somebody who's had a out-of-body near-death experience where they observed things outside of the room they were in. People have reported hearing a brother-in-law saying, yeah, I wish I hadn't taken off time from work, and then telling him next time I'm near death, you don't have to take off time from work. Those kind of things. So that's a pretty hard thing to explain in terms of just pure biochemical reactions in the brain. There's also generally a very strong feeling of profound peace and calm. At some point, people describe going through a dark tunnel towards a very bright but indescribable, but not so bright it hurts your eyes kind of light. At the end of the tunnel, they report that they're often greeted by loved ones who have passed away. And communication seems to take place between those two people or loved ones on the other side telepathically or through thought. So it's not like they talk back and forth, but they hear each other's thoughts. It's a pretty. I saw a story once about a guy who he was backing his motorcycle out of a driveway and he got hit and he got, he was dead briefly. And he saw his mother and his grandmother. He was in a beautiful field and he starts running to them and they're like, no, you have to stop. It's not your time yet. And he said, I threw myself on the ground and had a temper tantrum because I was so mad that I couldn't stay there. And he certainly didn't like the kind of guy that reads a lot about near-death experiences. So people are often greeted on the other side by loved ones, and we're going to show you some video in a little bit, people talking about their near-death experiences. People usually get the message that they have to go back, that it's not their time. Most are very ambivalent about that. Many people also talk about having a life review where they see primarily the emotional impact they've had on other people, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail because Jody Long did a study of people that had that life review, and some of what they all reported was very similar, and it's very compelling. I want you to know about it. But most are told they have to go back to Earth, and most generally do not want to go back to Earth. They really wish they could stay on the other side because there is just so much unconditional love. And I'll tell you a story. There was a woman, when I did this workshop once before at hospice, there was a woman present who I knew had a near-death experience, and I asked her to share it with the audience. She had died briefly while she was giving birth, and she went up the tunnel, and she was greeted by, I don't think it was loved ones, I think she saw a number of figures, and a man in a purple robe came to her. And she remembers saying to this man, why is there so much love here? Why is there just so much unconditional love? And he said to her, don't you remember, that's our essence. Our essence is love. And she said, oh yeah, how did I forget that? And she said, now explain this whole life-death thing. And she said, he explained the whole thing in about 3 sentences. It all made sense. And then he said, but you have to go back. And she said, am I going to remember this? And he said, everything but those last 3 sentences. So she said she never remembered those last 3 sentences. And I just saw recently that she had passed away. So I guess she's in a place where she does understand. But she had no fear of death after that experience, and that message that's our essence, that our essence is love, is something that really stayed with me. And you'll hear that many people who have near-death experiences talk about the unconditional love they feel on the other side, if you want to call it that, in heaven, whatever your words are. Now, these experiences were sort of first described by Raymond Moody. He wrote a book called Life After Life. It's kind of a classic. Melvin Morse, who's actually based in Delaware, interviewed children who had near-death experiences, and those said to him, you'll see, Dr. Morse, heaven is fun. They talk about how they see this brilliant, bright light, and when they first come back, when they're first brought back to life, they see the light in everything and everybody, they told him, which always gives me chills. Eben Alexander, we'll talk a little bit about him. He was a neurosurgeon that had such a compelling near-death experience that he felt he had to write a book about it, even though he knew he would be condemned by his fellow neurosurgeons. But he said that the experience was so profound he couldn't not write about it. And it really challenged his beliefs about life and death and whether consciousness it resides just in the physical brain. So he wrote a book called Proof of Heaven. I think it's on your handout. So now I'm going to ask Sarah to show. This is a video clip that's no longer on YouTube, unfortunately, but I unfortunately had it downloaded on my computer. So we'll see if we can play that. Let us know if you can hear it okay. Okay. It's a little, it's a little scratchy, the picture, but it's such a good video. Okay. It starts slow. I'm not hearing it, Sarah. Are other people hearing it?
No.
No, can't hear it, Sarah.
All right, I'm not on mute.
Sarah, there's a button in the upper right-hand corner. And
Can you hear it?
In the foreground and the bottom of the painting, we see
hear it
people
now.
who are dying, and as they are dying, you're surrounded by spiritual beings who attempt to turn their attention upward.
Can everybody hear it now?
Yeah.
Can you still see it too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Above them, there's a tunnel which goes off into the distance. And at the end of the tunnel is a very bright light. As these people go through the tunnel, they kneel reverently into the light. So we know then that these experiences have existed among human beings from time immemorial. In this light, they often tell us that they see relatives or friends of theirs who have already died, who seem to be there to meet them and to greet them and to help them through this transition.
Particularly very great thing happened with me. It was that I saw my parents, my real parents, and I understood that they were killed. And they were killed by KGB in Moscow, and I was happy of this. It sounds very ridiculous, but you know, I was happy because I was thought that I was abandoned by them.
And I'd lost a girlfriend in the polio epidemic in the 30s. I think it was 38, but I'm not positive of that date. And she assured me that everything was fine and she was happy. And I also saw my grandparents coming to meet me. I had never known my grandfathers. They had both passed away before I was born. But I did know my grandmothers and my mother also. And as I'm there, this baby appears to me. And he says, "Hi, I'm your brother." And I said, "I don't have a brother." And we don't talk as I'm talking to you. There was no way of misunderstanding. It was more like it was mental telepathy. And he shows himself to me as a small infant, dressed in a cap and a little long dress with a knitted sack over it, booties and socks, and tells me to look me over now and remember how I look this way. And you can tell our father when you get back, and he'll tell you it happened. And when I was able to talk to him, my dad said, "Well, I don't know how you knew that, because nobody but your mother, the doctor, and I knew about these things."
So it gives me hope to know that whatever happens, we'll be seeing each other again one day, as we're greeted by those loved ones, family and friends who have already died. All these greeters seem to be encouraging us to come into the presence of that light, and are letting us know that everything is going to be okay.
The being of light that these patients often describe encountering is plainly a personal being. They say that they are in the presence of a being of complete love who accepts them and loves them totally, and who has a wonderful personality, is very knowledgeable about them, very wise, very helpful, also has a wonderful sense of humor.
This is the most wonderful part of it. This is a warm, loving light. It's the most masculine, but it also has overtones of mother love, sisterly love. This just pulsates around. He has totally accepted me and forgiven me for everything I've ever done. But can I forgive myself for some of these selfish things I have done?
She took on all the pain and all the suffering with total understanding of what had brought me to that point. And it was like we were intertwined, and that everything that I felt, she felt too. And there was this unconditional love, like most parents have for their children. That no matter how bad I might have been, or that I was totally loved and totally understood, because she understood the motivation behind what I did. There was this togetherness, this empathy that she had for me, and just wonderful love.
And sitting there wondering what to do next, when suddenly that room became flooded with light. And then three things happened simultaneously, just like that. Something deep inside of the spiritual being sitting on the side of the bed looking at the corpse lying in the bed was told to stand up here in the presence of the Son of God. Out of that light stepped the most amazing being I have ever been in the presence of, the most powerfully built male I have ever seen.
To my right, I saw a being coming toward me. In those days, I had never heard of the death experience or ever had it described to me, so I had no idea how to relate to it. Since then, I've heard people describe it as God or Jesus or Moses or lots of different names, a great angel. I believe that this being of light was my higher self, the greater part of me, looking at the part of me that just experienced this life. As this being, because this being, I was so comfortable with this being and so assured that only if someone knew themselves and knew the love of God in them, then they could have that same relationship with themselves. And it was as if this being had come to be with me.
And now, once being in the presence of a being who knows everything about you, to know that he totally accepts you and totally loves you, I never want to leave this being again under any circumstance.
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting parts of a near-death experience to me. These patients will tell us that in the closing moments of their life, often in presence of this being of love who is with them, that they see a panorama before them, which consists of every single thing that they've ever done in their lives, from the moment of their birth right through the time of their close call with death. And they say that they see it all simultaneously, not with the events in temporal sequence, but rather all displayed there at once in a way that they find very difficult to describe.
As those hospital walls virtually disappeared, and I saw every minute detail of my life, seeing my own cesarean section birth through the 20 years that I had lived, because I was only 20 at the time.
With the light, there is this panoramic view of my life. It starts with birth. It continues right on to where we are at this point. All at the same time, I am part of the view as well as being watching it. I am actually doing these things. I guess it's a speeded up version of a camera that just runs double time or something. But I actually had the feelings of what was going on as I saw it, and also standing off to the side and being able to look around and look at the different things that went on at different times in my life.
I saw all my life, but it's in that dimension which cannot be described. This was holographical view of being inside of your life, and then being as a viewer, participating the play of theater which happening there. But it is you, and you know that you are this.
At Disney World, they have this Kodak ride where you sit in this seat and you go, there's this movie that surrounds you, and it makes you feel like you're a part of the action, and you can even get butterflies when there's a big drop or something. So it was around me in a form to where it was like I was participating, but it was participating in the mind or in thought. But it just seemed like a lifetime of pain happened in just a short period of time.
I had a panoramic view of my life, every feeling, every thought, every action, every deed, all at the same time. The same time. And as it started happening, I began to see how I affected the person that I had the encounter with, or the experience, whether it be me personally or whether it be someone else. And then how they were affected, how it was one step removed from us and how they were affected. And believe me, there is nothing hidden in your life.
All right, Sarah, you want to give it back to me here? All right. So I like that video. It's a very old video. It's not on YouTube anymore. If somebody really wants a copy, I can email it to you. I know the video is not good quality, but I like that most of the people being interviewed are not what you would think of as New Agers or non-traditional folks. They look pretty traditional to me, and they're describing what happened to them. They look like they could be your grandmother or your grandfather. That's what I like about it. So, what do people who have had near-death experiences report about what really matters in life? And they allude to this. That Jody Long was somebody who did a study on a subset of people who had near-death experiences. It included a life review. And she said, just as they had just mentioned, that many reported that a life review consisted more of reviewing the feelings than the events. That they said the review involved the feelings their earthly acts had invoked in others. As one person said, another in her study said, I saw my childhood and felt the emotions my actions created in others. And this is another quote. I then began to see my whole life unfolding before me like a film projected on a screen from babyhood to adult life. It was so real. I was looking at myself, but better than a 3D movie, as I was capable of sensing the feelings of the people I interacted with throughout the years. I could feel the good and the bad emotions I made them go through. Now, Oprah had somebody on that was a man who had been an abusive husband, a batterer, and during his life review, he felt all the fear he had ever generated in his wife as a result of his abusiveness. And when he came back, he immediately got into treatment and now runs treatment programs for men who are abusive because he felt the emotional impact he had had on other people. I think it's important to realize that that's part of it. What the life review consists of is understanding your impact. Now, again, usually if there's somebody there with them, viewing it with them, it is usually not somebody who's judgmental. It is somebody who's there to more say, as one of them said, they understood even better than I did why I did the things I did. So they are invited to look at this with eyes of compassion, and the idea more is to learn from it. Many came to understand that our mission in life really is to love and to help one another, and that love, and I'm quoting, love and the will to extend love toward others and towards self and others is the key component of spiritual growth. Not one person that she interviewed who did this life review had said anybody other than themselves appeared to be judging their actions, and I'm quoting, furthermore, the life review appeared to be a loving act, and we individually choose to adjust our actions accordingly. Any other being present during the life review is there out of compassion and is only there to help individuals. There is an element of correcting your behavior in keeping with this greater predetermined purpose. 75% of the people who had a life review said that experience changed their behaviors and their attitudes. It changed things like believing that, they now believe that life continued after death. They no longer had a fear of dying. They had an increased belief in sort of a supreme being or a loving being, and a sense that there is a deep interconnectedness among all living beings. And I think that's such an important message for us to hear today, that there is an interconnectedness between all living beings on this planet. They more readily embraced life when they returned, and they recognized it as precious. They were more self-accepting, more tolerant of others. They had an increased hunger for knowledge, because that's the other thing people come back and say, that it's all about learning. They were much more relaxed, and they believed people were far more important than anything materialistic. So I think those are really important messages, and that's what consistently this small group of people who had the life review said. For those who don't have a life review, even those who don't have a life review, however, come back with the message that it's all about the love. They talk about being embraced by a white light or an energy that some call God that loves them unconditionally. You heard that in some of the people that were on that video. And they also believe that our mission in life, as I said, is to love ourselves and to love one another. And now I'm going to ask Sarah to share the story of Anita Morjani, and I'll let you take it over. Can you back it up a little bit? I think we missed some of it.
But a woman in Hong Kong whose name is Anita Morjani. She's an author, a Hay House author now. She's written a book, a powerful book. And I read this story about Anita. And it seems that on the 2nd of February, in the year 2006, this woman was wheeled into a hospital in Hong Kong. She had been sick for 5 years. Her organs had all shut down. Her family was gathered at the emergency room. Her husband, who is here tonight, I'm honored to have met, beautiful man named Danny. And The doctors had told her family and her husband that these were her last hours. She was down to 86 or 88 pounds. Anita emerged from her coma, some 30 hours in a coma. And she has a story to tell that is so compelling. And she's here from Hong Kong to share with you some of the lessons that she learned while she was in this comatose state and what she came back to teach us. She's one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever been privileged to know and honored to support and write a foreword for her book. And she's here with us today, and I'd love you to meet her. Anita Morjane, please. Be seated.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Tell us, Anita, you're in a coma, your husband is whispering in your ear, your mother is there, your brother's on his way to see you, everybody's waiting for you to take your last breath. What were you observing, and what did you learn, and what did you come back to teach us?
Wow, there's so much there. Even though I was in a coma, I was actually aware of everything that was happening around me. I'm sorry, I still get emotional when I think of that state. It was 5 years ago, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I was in a coma, but I was aware of everything the doctors were doing. I was aware of my husband. My mother was crying. She was, because the doctors had told them that I only had a few more hours to live. My organs had shut down, and these were my last hours. And I wanted to assure them that I was feeling fine, that I was feeling great, but I couldn't. I couldn't understand why I couldn't communicate with them. And each time it felt as though I was getting involved in the drama, and my emotions were being pulled towards feeling for my mother and my brother. At the same time, it was as though I was being pulled away. And it was as though my energy or my awareness or consciousness was just expanding. And it was just expanding and expanding and just getting bigger and bigger. And it felt as though I could feel what everybody was feeling. I could feel what my husband was feeling, what my mother was feeling, and the doctors as they were running around trying to save my life. And then I became aware of what I can only describe as unconditional love. It was as though I was just surrounded or embraced by this unconditional love. And when I say unconditional, I mean really unconditional. It was like I didn't have to do anything to prove myself or to be anything, or I was loved unconditionally regardless. It was as though even things that I could have perceived to have done wrong in my life, it wasn't as though I was being judged. There was no judgment whatsoever. There was only compassion. It was like compassion, and it was like I understood in that state why I would do whatever I did in life. It was everything I did was out of the limitation of being in a physical body.
So you were looking at your body, and you were given a choice, is that right? Whether to get back into this sick body,
That's right.
Or not. And what did you do?
I became aware of the presence of my father. He had passed away 10 years before me. Mm-hmm. And I also became aware of my best friend who had passed away 2 years before, and I had missed her desperately because she was like a sister to me.
Did you feel when you were in that near-death experience state, in that coma, watching it, that coming back also meant that you had something to teach everyone? And what was it that you felt you had to teach them?
I felt that I had to come back because there was a greater purpose. Because at first I didn't want to come back into my body because my body was so sick, and there was just so much unconditional love on that side. It's really, really hard to leave. So if anybody has lost anyone, I can completely understand why they would stay there. But also, I seem to get the message. I seem to understand that it wasn't my time, and I had a mission. I had a purpose, and I had not yet fulfilled. And I seemed to understand that even in order to fulfill my purpose, I wouldn't have to really go and figure it out, or I wouldn't have to pursue anything. I would just have to go back and live fearlessly and just not be afraid to be myself. And that's all I had to do. I also sensed that my husband and I still had a purpose to fulfill. My husband he's truly my soulmate because he was there talking to me all the way through, talking in my ear and holding my hand. And I was aware of that.
You learned some very important things. Yes. Was it like just about being positive, to be a positive thinker? Was that?
No, in fact, being positive is not enough. I used to always be positive because I was a people pleaser. Mm-hmm. I used to always stay positive because I never wanted to bother anyone or trouble anyone. I learned that more important than being positive is being yourself. I learned that that's actually the most important thing, is to be yourself. Because that's why we're here. We're here because we're facets of one. It was as though we are all one. Without my body, it felt as though I was connected to everyone and everything.
Was fear a big part of your life, and had something to do with
being ill,
being sick?
Yes, fear was a big part of my life before I was sick. I used to live a life in fear of not being good enough, fear of everything, fear of illness, fear of not meeting other people's expectations. And but my near-death experience taught me that there's nothing to fear. In fact, when I was given the choice, I felt I reached a point where I had the choice of whether to come back or not. And it was my father and my best friend who actually said, now that you know who you truly are, go back and live your life fearlessly.
And have you been doing that?
Yes, I have.
Sarah, can you unmute me?
Oh, you're talking.
Okay, listen, we're going to skip the next video because we're not going to have enough time for it, but the link is in your handout, and she talks similarly about feeling like she's sitting in the hand of God and this sort of unconditional love. So I'm going to skip that video so that we can show the last one. But let me tell you a few things about that. You keep hearing this repeated message about being loved just the way you are, and that's part of what's in that video we're going to skip, but you can watch it. And I'm also struck by the fact that Wayne Dwyer tries to say, so are we supposed to just be positive? And she comes right back at him and says, no, we're supposed to be real. We're supposed to be authentic. I could always be positive. I could always be a people pleaser. But she was taught, come back and be yourself. Come back and be real. Don't be a people pleaser. Even Alexander, who wrote a book about his near-death experience, said, we are more loved than we know from the other side. We are more loved than we know. And so I just want you to think about this. There's a little bit of some questions at the end of your handout, but how would your life be different if you loved yourself unconditionally? If you loved yourself just as the white light loves us in a way that has nothing to do with our imperfections, but loves us just the way we are. And let me just say a little bit more about that's enough about the near-death experience. I want to jump up a little bit and talk about afterlife communication. But I really think that's an important message to take home. How would your life be different if you could love yourself just the way you are? Because that's what the woman in the second video that we're not going to see says. I was loved with all my quirks, all my imperfections, just the way I was. And she too did not want to come back, but she did come back. She said she's still trying to figure out why. Let's talk about a little bit about after-death communication, and I know these are big topics and hard to cover in an hour, but the Guggenheims wrote a book called Hello from Heaven, and they interviewed, over 7 years, they interviewed over 3,300 people who had first-hand experiences of feeling the presence of a loved one in all 50 states and Canada. And according to Guggenheim's, the bereaved described their experiences in the following ways. They may have sensed or felt the presence of a loved one. They might have heard the loved one's voice or got a verbal message they thought from the loved one. They may feel the touch of a loved one. They may feel as though someone touched them. They may smell a fragrance that's associated with the loved one. A client of mine recently told me she asked her boyfriend if he smoked cigars in her car when he borrowed it. He said, he did not smoke cigars, but he could smell the cigar smoke. He said, I've smelled it for the last hour. Now, neither she nor he had actually ever smoked cigars in that car, and no one else had borrowed the car. But the one person she knew who smoked cigars was her deceased grandfather. So she was sure that was him. People see their deceased loved one. People sometimes have visions that involve telepathic communication. Sometimes people have what are called twilight after-death communication, ADCs. That's people are falling asleep sometimes when people are waking up. You're in a sort of altered state of consciousness. Some people have experiences of leaving their body and encountering their loved one. Some people actually have what are called telephone after-death communications, where the person feels they heard a loved one's voice on the telephone. That's considered one of the least common of all of them, but I actually know someone who the phone rang, they picked it up, she heard her grandmother's voice on the other side, and then she disappeared, and she just said goodbye, and they got a phone call immediately after saying the grandmother had just died. Sometimes after-death communication comes in the form of physical phenomenon, such as lights turning on and off. That's one I hear almost all the time. I don't know if it's because we're energy in that form and we can affect energy, but lights come on, TVs come on, light bulbs burst. I have somebody who's had 3 near-death experiences, and she burns out almost every nightlight in her house when she just walks past them because of her energy, I suppose. Doors opening and closing, that kind of physical phenomenon. And finally, there's often something called symbolic after-death communication. That involves something in the physical realm that the bereaved person experiences as a sign from the deceased, such as the appearance of birds or butterflies, pennies, and rainbows. I had a friend who worked for a hospice in New Jersey, and she would visit a patient who was dying, and the patient would say, my son and my husband are out on the back porch, and there were 2 love doves that were always on her back porch. And she came to see her one day and learned that she had passed away, and she looked outside and there were 3 love doves out on the back porch. There's another story about a woman whose husband died in the 9/11 attacks. He was in one of the towers, and they used to work in a financial firm, and they would throw quarters at each other, sort of a upscale version of pennies from heaven. And so they would collect quarters and they'd toss them at each other as some sort of flirtation. And one night after he had been gone for some time and she was going to go on a date, she got ready for her date. The date never showed up. Later she got a call from him and said, I was outside ringing your doorbell, and you didn't answer. And she thought, I wonder if I should even be doing this. And he said, but for some reason, something just told me to leave as proof that I was here a quarter. And I put a quarter on your doorstep. And sure enough, she went down and there was the quarter. And he had no idea that that was something she and her husband had done together. I've got a few other stories. They're in your handout. I'm going to let those go so that you can hear this reading by Lisa Williams, who is a medium. And she starts with one of a woman just on the street, but the one she gives next is about for parents who have lost a child. And I think it's particularly compelling, and I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. I don't hear it. I don't hear it.
Stop you.
Oh, there you go.
Hi. How are you? Hi, I'm Lisa.
Hi, I'm Viola.
Hi, Viola. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm a medium, and I don't know whether you're aware of what mediums do, but we communicate with those who are no longer with us. I hope you don't mind me stopping you, but you have this very intense woman that's walking with you. Oh, she's like a mum. Do you understand this? She's like a mother figure. Was she quite an intense woman? Because she's very intense for me. Yes. You know, it was either her way or the highway, you know? Mm-hmm. She's very strong. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. She mentioned my mother. I totally recognized her. She has, the strong personality, and it's her way or highway. She's so like her.
Do you have brothers?
One brother.
She loved you equally. You need to know that. You really need to know that she loved you equally, because you doubted her love for you.
The specific thing she brought up that I knew it was my mother was definitely the brother-sister thing, that she said, she loves me equally like my brother. And that was so important for me to hear.
She's showing me that she never got to say goodbye. And she's saying it happened so quickly. And what she's referring to is that you couldn't get there. Do you understand that? Mm-hmm. And she wants you not to feel guilty.
I'm sorry. It's okay. Please don't feel guilty. No, okay. Yeah, when Lisa told me that I don't have to feel guilty because I didn't have the chance to say goodbye, it was exactly like that. Because it was so quick. She had like emergency surgery. And then when my brother called me, she already passed away.
And she hears you when you talk to her. And just know that she adores you. And you know what? You're doing the right thing, and you're trying so hard in your life, and you are trying to achieve so much. Just keep on trying, baby, is what she's just said. Keep on trying.
When Lisa told me that my mother's here and that she loves me, it was, I don't know, it was tremendous. It was just beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I can communicate with loved ones who are no longer with us. My name is Lisa Williams.
People often ask me, where do our loved ones go when they die? To me, it's a difficult question to answer because we continue to grow and learn on the other side. We just don't have our vessel. But what's important is to just imagine that they're next door and you've lost the key or there's no door. Talk to them, speak to them. They actually want to hear from you and they will show you the signs that they are there and they're listening. I'd like to welcome my first guests today, Catherine and David. Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing? Good. I understand that you have lost somebody very important to you. I don't know who it is, and I'm hoping that they will make an entrance today. The one thing that I always ask is, do you want to know everything? Yes, everything. I've got this younger energy who's very, can I say outrageous? And a lot of fun. And I've got he's coming forward, very jumping up and down like he's happy, 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 happy. And this is the only way I can explain this. Would I be right in saying this is a child of yours, a son? Yeah. Because he keeps coming forward and he's like, hi, Mom, Mom, Mom. And he's excited. It's, you know, really emotional, really like hyper is the only way I can explain this. Did one of you make him play the keyboard, you know, the piano?
I did.
It wasn't a choice.
No.
You are playing the piano, okay? And I almost feel he was a bit embarrassed about playing the piano, you know? He's this cool kid who plays the piano very well. He's telling me, you know, he would. Good. And you still have music that you think of, or you think of him, and you, okay, you still have music that you. He's just shouted out a name at me. You still have music that you think. He's thrown me. Who's Jordan? That's him. Thank you. You okay? You all right? He's really here. Yes. Standing right behind you. Oh. Okay. He's showing me a holiday. And he's showing me he knew it was going to be the last holiday. Do you understand that? Yes. Just got to say this. What's that boat? What I'm seeing is I feel like I shouldn't have sat where or stood where I was. Does that make sense? Because I feel knocked over. I feel like I've just knocked. I don't feel like I've gone in the water. I feel knocked over. And I feel very. He said, I didn't know what happened. And he keeps saying, I didn't want to go. Do you understand this? I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go.
She kept saying holiday.
Yeah,
We knew that.
I chartered a catamaran.
He made him go on.
He wanted to stay on the beach, and I told him
he wanted to stay on the beach and boogie board.
You know, we were a mile off Waikiki on the boat, and we turned to come back, and it, all of a sudden something just like it hit, and the whole mast just bent, and he was standing right next to it, and it hit him in the back and hit him. And I couldn't get it off him.
No one could. 20 men couldn't lift it.
And he was killed instantly, and he died in my arms.
He keeps saying we shouldn't have gone. Does that make sense? We shouldn't have gone.
We still feel guilty about making him go on that boat. And we wanted to know if he blamed us. Does he blame us for what happened? He was a great kid. He was only 13.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We shouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
Sure, you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Sure. Mm-hmm. He's saying, Mum, don't cry.
I can't help it,
He doesn't like
Jordan.
you crying.
I miss you so much.
He's just said, I'm there with you.
All the time.
He's telling me he hasn't been gone long. Do you understand this? Yes. And he keeps telling me that... Okay. Dad, why do you feel guilty for this? Because you know what? Okay, he's calling this a freak accident. Do you understand this? He's saying it's not your fault. And he keeps saying, please don't feel guilty.
Okay. Mm-hmm. We've had a hard time wondering if he blamed us for this because we made him go on the boat. And I don't think he does.
Okay, he's just said, I knew it was coming. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He knew it was coming. And he's showing me that for weeks he was preparing you.
Yeah. He wrote on MySpace. We found it after he passed away. And I wondered about
I've gone all goosebumpy, and he knew he was going to pass.
Okay, that was one of my questions for you. Did he have a notion? Did he know in the back of his mind?
Okay. He's just said he knew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
On MySpace, he put who his hero was, and it was supposed to be my name on there, but he put Jesus, and that's the only thing that thought my name, I think.
And he put, I'll be seeing you soon. Not I'll be seeing you someday. He said, I'll be seeing you soon. But until then, much love. And that was kind of strange to us.
Did he have smelly feet?
Sometimes. Yes, he did.
He's just stuck his trainers there, his sneakers. And I'm thinking, okay, they smell. And do you smell him?
Yes.
Because he says, you smell me. And you smell him.
I do. I smell him. We were in the car one day and I looked at him and he looked at me and we smelled him. He was there. It's just really bizarre, but we know he's there with us. And my mother does too.
You smell him. And did he mess with his hair? Because it's like he's messing with my hair. And, you know, he's mimicking what I do in my... This is what I do. I sit and twist all my little bits. And he's doing this.
He had hair like yours.
Oh, he had hair like mine. No wonder he likes it. Because he's just showing me all these little twisty bits. So funny. His energy is starting to edge off. Do you have any other questions that you need me to ask?
He did pass right away. He didn't pass at the hospital.
He didn't pass at the hospital.
Okay.
He passed right away.
And went straight there.
And when?
We just miss him and we love him.
And he loves you too. And he hasn't gone anywhere.
You're welcome. He did exactly what we were hoping for. We were wanting these answers to these questions, and we got him today. Our lives will never be the same. It's amazing what she did for us. I feel better. I feel like I have some closure. And I know where he is, and I know he's okay.
All right. Well, I know we don't have a lot of time left. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't know if people believe in mediums or not, but I just remember hearing that reading. It was so compelling, and I've not met a parent ever who didn't feel guilty about their child's death and somehow feel it was their fault, even if that child was a million miles away, because I think parents always feel responsible for their children. So I just thought it was such a powerful reading, and I really wanted to show that. you're going to see on your handout, I've listed other videos about near-death experiences. There's tons on YouTube if you want to look for it. There's also a number of people who I think are pretty compelling in terms of doing readings about the afterlife. Tyler Henry is a young man, and again, I've put these names on your handout. He was called Hollywood Medium. He's a young guy. Now he's got his own show called Life After Death. Very compelling, gets a lot of details. There's also a man named Thomas John who had a show called Seatbelt Psychic. He would ride around in Ubers and give people rides to places, and then he would read them while they were in the Uber. And I saw some of them that were just so compelling. And of course, you probably all have heard about Long Island Medium, who's Teresa Caputo. She has her own show. And there was a show that you can get past episodes on by going to I think it was Bravo or AETV, Arts and Entertainment, called Psychic Kids. It was about kids that were developing psychic abilities and were frightened by them, and they also, the parents were very freaked out about them, and they brought in another person who was a psychic that worked with the kids, and they brought in a family therapist to work with the parents. So it was very interesting. So the names of those shows are on your handout. There's an extensive reading list. So much has been written about this, and I gave you some questions to think about. Like, how would your life be different if you loved yourself unconditionally? And have you ever had an experience you couldn't explain? Or have you ever felt the presence of a loved one and dismissed it? Because I think we tend to do that because we live in such a concrete world that unless there's proof, we don't know it's real. So anyhow, I don't have any definitive answers on any of this, but I think it's pretty compelling, and it certainly stretches the boundaries of my thinking. And I'm open to the idea that there is a great mystery that we don't have a whole handle on. So I know we're just about out of time, but if anybody...
Thank you again, Dr. Judy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you have a safe holiday weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next month.